Welcome, bienvenue, welcome one and all to another Property Quorum. It comes down so quick. I'm great pleasure to introduce you, if I haven't already seen, the man himself, Hamish McLay of Search Convey. Of course, the delectable Juliet Baboolal of gunnercooke LLP, and of course, the man who is right up against the coalface, Chris Gilsenan of Root Home, property developer du jour, specialist in social housing. Now, we are graced today by a lady called Sam Robinson of Lionize Law, another legal eagle. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you.
I'm glad you could make it. As you know, there's no running, no bombing or any other kind of craziness here. We try and hit the topics fairly square on. Today's topic is what, Hamish?
Well, today's is making the deal count, or making the deal happen, which is totally out of my arena in many respects. I can do all sorts of aspects to help it along, but we have one or two experts with us who can actually really push the thing and make sure that it does actually sort of get over the brow of the hill, which is where the little old engine. I don't know if any of you remember that little old engine trying to get over the hill. That's
Yes, I do indeed.
Story for another day.
But Tish and Pish, I'm sorry, but you have rather thrown Sam Robinson under the bus. Welcome, Sam. I'm glad you could make it. What is he talking about? Getting the deal over the line? What's that all about?
I mean, I think there's so many elements to getting the deal over the line, and so many things that are within our control, outside of our control, and it's just trying to come together and I think have transparency between all parties and have everyone singing from the same hymn sheet to try and work together to get it over the line. That means working with search providers, working with the client, working with the other side. A lot of the time, which is one of my pet hates, which I think Juliet agrees with, is not picking up the phone and just having that conversation, getting that rapport with the other side. I think that always helps. If you've got that good rapport, it's easy to pick up the phone, see where we're at, see what we're waiting on, how we can move things forward. And I think it's just being personable and speaking to one another more.
Wow. Is that all it means? That everybody just has to make nice to each other? What do you think, Juliet?
The thing is, we've spoken about this in sort of so many roundabout different ways. The reality is you've got so many moving parts in a transaction. And the key thing is to really understand your role in that transaction. One of the earlier podcasts that we had, someone said, a delay was caused because the seller hadn't completed the property information form. So, it's all good and well to play that blame game, but really understand what your role is in the transaction, understand what your timescales are. And communication is key, absolutely. And, Sam and I were talking the other day, and it's sort of like people are, they refrain from picking up the phone. They just send an email, and an email can be read. It can be interpreted in several different ways, or it can be missed altogether. And, you're blaming the fact that that person hasn't responded to the email when in fact they may not have seen it. Whereas if you had a phone to phone, you know exactly where that person is and you can manage expectations. So, my sort of viewpoint in terms of getting deals done is you've got many moving parts. Understand your role in that transaction. So, for example, a mortgage underwriter. Yesterday, I saw an article where it said, look, mortgage underwriter, do these checks before, so that you can push your deal through to terms very quickly. Do checks on the borrower, etc. Don't wait until last minute when you realize, well, actually, there's a little bit of a hiccup. I can't lend to you. And then that person's finances go out of the door and they're starting from ground one or ground zero all over again. So really understanding your role in the transaction, I think, is absolutely key.
But all these lawyers, Chris, aren't they just kicking their heels and spinning wheels and such like? It always seems to disappear up a certain fundament whenever they get involved. Am I wrong?
There's so many moving parts to a transaction. It can be very frustrating from time to time, certainly when you're either on just the buying side or the selling side, and then you're and you're not aware of all these moving parts. Juliet just made a good point that tickled me. There's a certain lender who, I won't name them, but we've used many times, and they
Out
seem
them,
to leave,
out them, out them. No, okay.
no, I won't do that. But they seem to always leave all their mortgage underwriting to the very last minute, normally like the day of completion. Then they decide to reopen the case file and go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. So yeah, that did tickle me. I see Juliet probably knows who they are as well.
I'm sure at some point we'll all know who they are. No, but
we should have them on the show, Chris. We should bring them on.
Well, name and shame them on the show.
We face them up to this, Juliet. So is it true that you are stuck down the pub having too many shandies and can't be bothered to move the case along? We could say that. No, of course we wouldn't. But Hamish, all this searching behind the scenes, isn't that what slows everything up?
Yes and no, but largely it doesn't. But very interesting comment made, interesting enough, by both Sam and Juliet, because we hear so often about the sides, and there aren't really sides because we're all part of the same whole, and people rather forget that. But an interesting sort of subject sort of came up. I was approached by somebody who's desperate to get a deal over the line for a property they're buying in Bedford, and asked if I could actually get some information for them from Bedford. And do you know what? There is not a phone number at Bedford that I can make use of to actually speak to anybody in a particular position. A lot of councils have done this. They've used, a little bit like doctors have, they've used sort of COVID as a tremendous example of, hey, you don't need to speak to people on the phone. So they've cut out lots of phone contact. So they just will not on. Sometimes you don't get a phone number. And that is a big distraction. I mean, I'm a great believer in what Juliet said and what Sam have said particularly. And of course, we know Chris as well. He gets very much involved in what is going on with anything that's sort of happening there. And it's so important. But if somebody says, no phoning. So it's not entirely the searches that can hold things up. If people leave it late in the day, there can be, but there are ways of overcoming that. We can overcome that. We can get around that most of the time. And there hasn't been an instance where we haven't been able to get around it somehow or other.
Oh, wow. Well, okay. So, Sam, tell me of something we can do as your common garden punter, just making sure that we speed things along. What can we do at the back end?
Yeah, there's a few things really, because I think a lot of the time as well, even just to actually set a file up our end, we need client ID, we need proof of address, we need source of funds. And quite often I will try and set a file up and I'm waiting on things from the client. So it's almost like we need to have the same expectations as what you would place on your solicitor on yourself. And if you can get, if a solicitor asks for a document and says, we need your ID, or where's the funds coming from? We need, if there's a gift, or is it a mortgage? Those types of things really help us get the file set up quickly, get the transaction moving. I also think transparency on search results helps, because 9 times out of 10, it's the local authority search we're waiting on. You do normally get an estimated date as to the return date. If we can just ask the other side if we're acting, what date is the local authority search expected to return, we have a bit of a heads up as to where the transaction is going and the timescales. We can advise our client, they can advise their client. It gives us the time to, do maybe the report on the title whilst waiting for the searches. So there's certain things that, we can do to help. But I think it also does require the input from the client as well. And just to really try and, if we do need something, if the property information forms, if we send them out, if there's any questions, pick up the phone, we'll go through them with you. But try and really be proactive in getting information back. If you're selling a property, try and have all your information to hand, any boiler services, recent utilities bills, anything you have in relation to property and insurance policies, just everything you've got, the more detail, the merrier.
Juliet, do you sometimes find that people just aren't communicative enough?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the problem. The problem is it's all about, playing that blame game. You've got brokers involved. Brokers are after their commission and they'll say, oh, the lenders, I get this all the time. I see it on LinkedIn all the time. The lender solicitors are holding it up. okay, so what exactly is being held up? I mean, so for me, what I tend to do is I circulate CP lists, so condition precedence lists, or a schedule of requirements, and it's a moving traveling list. So you can see exactly where we are at any particular time, and you know exactly where the ball is at. So for example, yes, searches, sometimes they are delayed back. You know, if a solicitor, often on a development, they'll say, well, I didn't know we needed development searches. Well, my schedule of requirements specifically says that. So it's impossible that you didn't know that was a day one requirement. But if you leave that to the last minute and that's holding up a transaction, the borrower solicitor, or the buyer solicitor, isn't going to put up their hand and say, well, actually I forgot to, they'll blame it on the lender's lawyers. Well, look, they want something else. The reality is communication in as effective form as possible, whatever that is, whether it's a telephone call, because often you have a phone call and you've got to follow up that with an email of what you discussed, because some people will say yes to everything, and then after they've understood something completely different from what you've stated on the telephone. So it's really important to have checks and balances, and I think having those checklists where all the parties are aware of where everything's at is really important. I had a lender client once who used sort of technology, AI. It was an app where each party, so the lenders, lawyers, the borrowers, lawyers, everyone had access to that, including the broker. And as a particular element of the transaction completed, you could tick that off the list. And so it was a traveling list, and you could see how much of the percentage of the transaction remained outstanding. So the lender was fully aware.
Sounds like genius.
Amazing. So 10% remaining. So we've got to get our funds together, because the last thing you want to hear is you're ready to complete and the lender hasn't ordered funds, or they need 5 days notice or whatever. No one's picked up on that. It's going to delay your transaction. You might incur damages, costs, interests, etc. So that really worked. I think they need to sort of explore those avenues a little bit more, use technology to their advantage, and that can help speed things along.
Do you know my favorite story is when we were about to exchange, and our solicitor had taken that particular time to go on a month's holiday. Anyway, moving on. Bygones. Chris, do people hold you up sometimes as not telling you what the hell's going on, or pretending they know what's going on when in fact they haven't got a Scooby-Doo?
All the time. Normally it's vendors. I have to do. I spend a lot of my time talking with vendors and trying to get deals done. So there's lots of negotiation, there's lots of to and fro, and it takes quite a bit of time getting into the reasons why someone does want to sell, and then being able to not just get to the motivation, but then get to the solution and wrap it around the motivation. So it's a compelling argument for them to sell, and to sell for doing X, Y, Z with me. So yeah, I spend a lot of time doing that, but it does take up a lot of my time. But it's worth doing, and worth doing properly. So it takes time to do properly. So yeah, sorry about that. Yes, vendors do slow me down, but that's all my own fault.
Well, Chris, I just don't know how you manage to maintain your sweet, even-tempered temperament. So,
well, there are other people that suck up my time as well, and stop me from getting deals done. So I've got a surveyors on my hit list for this morning.
Oh God! Is it all about the surveyors then? Is it them the ones that are holding everything up, Hamish?
Not necessarily. I mean, they go through the same as everybody else. If times are really, really busy, of course they can get held up, and they're not necessarily available at the appropriate times. But on the whole, they're one of the easier bunches to work with, I have found in my experiences. But I don't have to go through the same kind of hoops as Chris does, because they're not part of my normal sort of reaction. Just people will ask me, Hamish, can you put me in touch with a surveyor? And I just happen to know some surveyors, and I know half a dozen of them. I can just make a quick phone call. And in fact, there's also links with it. So that's not a challenge in terms of my end, what I actually sort of need to do. I think what it is, the councils are getting better and better. And I think 75% of the councils are absolutely sort of great in terms of what they do. But there is that occasion when it's not actually going to work, as we say with Bedford. I won't go into Bedford because I'm doing battle with them with the ICO at the moment, the Information Commission's office, because they won't who won't allow me to get information. And I do things like that because I want to set it up, because at the end of the day, it's the buyers and the sellers and their residents paying their public council tax fees that they should be working on behalf of. Not
Careful now. I see feathers coming out your mouth. No spitting of that. Now look, ladles and jelly spoons. I want to go round the table before we finish up today. If each one of you could come up with one useful little nugget of advice for people to make sure that we get the deal across the line. Sam, let's start with you.
I mean, sorry, my brain was just thinking then about cost, but that's not going to help in certain ways. But one of my things is it's so competitive, and especially residential conveyancing, and we're driving the market down with costs, which making solicitors so much busier than they should be, that it's really slowing the process down. So I think putting our costs up would actually help speed the process up, because I think that we could then have more time to get the better jobs done, because we're just driving the market down, which is slowing the market down.
So perversely, putting costs up might slow the market down. Well, sounds like a humdinger to me. Juliet?
I think it's about choosing the right professionals. So you know what your project is.
We have banged this drum a number of times before.
But it is the key thing, because it's the one thing, if we're going to blame surveyors and the cert providers and the lawyers, if we're going to know who you're instructing and get some references, etc., and know that they've done it before, so they can actually hold your hand or take you through the process. Look, no deal is ever without problem. Every single transaction has a problem. It's about how quickly you can get over that hurdle and find a solution to that problem. And you will find that solution if you use the right experts, because they will have seen it before, or they will know who to pick up the phone and ask, for some clues, etc. So choose the right professionals. Do your homework. Spend a little bit of time, in terms of looking at the histories and the references, referrals for these individuals, and choosing the right parties. Because even though from a cost perspective, you might think, well, actually, I don't want to use that person because they're a little bit expensive, it will save you in the long run. You will save on time and costs in the long run if you get your project team correct from the beginning.
Single largest single investment for most people, other than that Maserati, of course. Chris, what suggestions have you got?
Yeah, to piggyback off the back of what Sam and Juliet are saying, they're absolutely right. Price is not the only factor when you're instructing your professional team. You need quality. So you need people that you can trust and who can get the job done properly. So the race to the bottom is not one I'd suggest. And it's when you're talking about such high value transactions, why would you try and penny pinch on your professional team? Doesn't make sense.
No, of course, because long term you get bad advice, you end up with bad results. Hamish, final word with you, sir.
I think we've had so much sort of said about it. It's the team that clearly is the important thing. But what we need to do, I think, as professionals who are involved, is try and help people to understand that it's what they do that does make the significant difference. If they take the time to choose the team, but they don't necessarily know that, we need to help them. We need to help people to understand that they can make things move so much more effectively when they themselves know exactly what they want to do, and they've got a team that can help them achieve it.
In the words of John Lennon, can't we all just bloody get along? Thank you very much for your time today. Hamish McLay, of course. Chris Gilsenan of Root Home, thank you for your time. Sam Robertson, a virgin here, but I think you the blush is off the bloom. Hopefully you'll come back again. And Juliet, as ever, sage advice from one and all. So all it remains for me to say is thank you for attending Property Quorum. Tell your friends, tell your enemies. I don't care. Just bring them along, because I think it's well worth watching. And until next week, I just want to say thank you, one and all. And I wish everyone safe and sensible working, and, of course, good mental health. Bye-bye now.